Today I want to talk to you about Naomi, a character created by Brian Michael Bendis for his Wonder Comics imprint over at DC Comics. Now, Brian Michael Bendis is a very polarizing figure. The early years of his career saw him release a lot of acclaimed books. From his reinvention of the Avengers, which saw the Avengers have a new popularity that they had never had before, to his creator-owned books like Powers, to the creation of Jessica Jones, and his very long tenure writing Ultimate Spider-Man, all the way up to and including the creation of Miles Morales. But not all of his work has been great. He developed a very specific style of writing dialogue, which has become very iconic and emblematic of Brian Michael Bendis, but unfortunately can often make characters feel very different and very unusual and not like what they would actually be like, or not the way that they are characterized by other writers. And his handling of certain characters can be very engaging and interesting, but then a lot of the ways he has handled different characters that have been long established before him fall kind of flat and give characterizations that don't really feel like the character that we've always known. So for instance, his current run on Superman is widely derided. And a lot of that comes from the fact that Brian Michael Bendis didn't really understand Superman when he took over the character. He has even said in an interview that it wasn't until after he had written the character for a little while that he really understood what people liked about the character and what made them gravitate towards him. And so in his current run of Superman, he's done a lot of things that have made Superman fans very upset, not least of which being the aging up of Superman's son, Jonathan Kent. And Jonathan Kent was a widely appreciated character, and personally a favorite of mine. And I really loved the idea of Superman as a father raising this young half-Kryptonian boy and trying to help him navigate the modern world as a child who is developing these powers. And then Brian Michael Bendis comes along and ages him up, and he just strips all of that away. And all of a sudden, Jonathan Kent went from, I think it was like 10 or so, to all of a sudden now he's 17. I feel like the DC Universe lost a lot just in that one decision alone. And that's just one example of how Brian Michael Bendis has stepped into writing Superman and has changed things for the worse. And so, knowing all of this, I was a bit skeptical going into reading any of his comics. I picked up the first volumes of his Superman run, but I haven't really dived into them yet. But then when I saw season 1 of Naomi for really cheap, I was curious, but I was also very skeptical. But I went ahead and took the plunge because Brian Michael Bendis does have a hard time writing established characters, but for the most part, from what I have seen, when he is creating new characters, he does a pretty good job with that. So I was curious if that might be the case here. And from what I read in this first volume, it does seem to be the case. I actually enjoyed this. Now, this is very much an origin story. It does not shy away from that at all. In fact, the entire comic is Naomi trying to figure out where she came from. And as a result, this is a much slower comic than you might be expecting. There's not a lot of action. It's very dialogue heavy, which, you should expect that from Brian Michael Bendis. It feels like a typical Bendis book in which there are a lot of 2-page spreads that really don't need to be spread across 2 pages. It's one thing if you have this big bombastic sequence where you have a ton of imagery that you want to fit into a single image, or you just want to show off the grand scope of it. But he has a tendency to fill 2 pages with a bunch of dialogue. But formatting aside, Naomi does feel like a pretty fleshed out character, as well as the main characters surrounding her. She does have a number of friends who feel fairly natural but don't get a lot of page time, so you don't get to know them too well. But the people that you do get to see quite a bit, such as her parents, her best friend, a man named D who works down at the local garage, all of these characters feel pretty natural and decently fleshed out, even though the focus isn't on them. And Naomi herself does feel like she has a bit of depth and at least has the potential for some nuance. I do have some concern going forward how she might be utilized, especially since I know she goes over to Young Justice, and a lot of writers, including Brian Michael Bendis, do have some difficulty in balancing a large cast and giving them all adequate screen time and decent character development. But I will reserve judgment for that until I eventually get around to checking out Young Justice. For now, I do have to say, I did quite enjoy Naomi Season 1. It does a good job of establishing the small town feel while also making it set firmly in the DCU. All of the events are set off by an appearance of Superman, and the entire town clamors about it because that's the most exciting thing that's ever happened in this town. And it also ties into the greater DC universe by bringing in things like the Rann-Thanagar War. So overall, I enjoyed Naomi. It helps me be a little bit less skeptical about Brian Michael Bendis working at DC. While I am very unhappy with the things that he has done to Superman, and so far I don't really appreciate his work within DC, Naomi does give me some hope and shows signs that he does have some appreciation for the DC universe that wasn't necessarily evident prior to this. And the fact that reading this makes me curious to check out Young Justice, I would say is a pretty good sign, because prior to this, I was kind of wanting to avoid most things that Brian Michael Bendis touched. I would have said that he should go back to focusing on his independent work, or else writing books for DC about lesser known characters rather than focusing on some of the big characters like Superman. So yeah, I am interested in checking out Young Justice now as a result of reading this, and I will definitely be picking up Naomi Season 2 whenever it comes out. I wouldn't say that this is a book that you need to run out and get, but if you're curious about it, I would recommend giving it a shot. And the art by Jamal Campbell is great. I really love the facial expressions and just how expressive a lot of the characters are in their physicality. He conveys a lot with the body language, where I feel like a lot of other comic artists tend to lack. Jamal Campbell really excels in that area. And the action sequences, though they are relatively few in this book, are extremely dynamic and very engaging. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Naomi Season 1. If you could help me out and hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe, and let me know down in the comments what you think of Brian Michael Bendis, and whether or not you'd be willing to give more of his books a try. And until next time, this is Uncle Joel saying, stay tangible.